Hey Axis and Allies players, the good captain here. Welcome to video number 2 in my Axis and Allies D-Day series. This video is the German strategic video, and in it I'll be covering what I feel is the most competitive strategy to use as the German player. But before I go into explaining and demonstrating this strategy, I have a couple of points to go over. The first is to just state again that I feel very strongly this game is imbalanced in favor of the Germans. This means that there are probably multiple different strategies that can produce a win as this side. So what I'm really advocating for is that this strategy I'm about to show is the most effective one for Germany. I believe that it has the highest chance of success game to game. And the other point is to review the victory conditions for this game. Unlike other versions of Axis and Allies, there really is no controlled territories. In other words, there's no need for control markers. There's somewhat of an exception to that rule in that, of course, Caen, Saint-Lô, and Cherbourg to the northwest must be controlled by the Allies for a complete round of play. And for the Allies to be considered in control of a city, they must have at least one piece present, and there can be no German pieces in the zone with them. And the non-intuitive portion of this rule is that a city that has been captured by the Allies, that is then vacated, is considered under German control. The Allies must always have at least one piece in one of these cities for it to be considered under their control. We'll touch on this again in the Allied strategic video. I just need to cover this now because we are going to take advantage of this rule as the German player. Before we begin, I just want to orient everyone to my board and say that this is the board state from the end of video 1 in this series. We'll be using this as a platform going forward, but whether one side or the other got diced or not, this has really no effect on what we're going to do as the German player. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into the German strategy, which I call the plow. This is a very straightforward strategy. It's mildly challenging to master, but just understanding some of the fundamentals should set you up on a path to victory. And the area of focus is right here, in the middle section of the board, in the area between Saint-Lô and Caen. And in the fewest amount of words, what we're going to do as the German player is slowly occupy these territories in the center of the board with very strong 8-piece armies to the point where we are basically holding this line right here. Everything above this line we want to consider the Allied territories, and everything below this in the middle of the board is really prime real estate as the German player. This does not have to be a quick migration, and our movements might seem a bit slow and ponderous, especially in the first turn or two, but the Allied player will have very little power to stop us from doing this, and once complete, the Germans will have very positive control over the territories adjacent to each of these victory cities. We're going to work towards why this is a good thing to do as the German player, but I believe it will be more clear and understandable by first discussing how to move this plow forward. So I'm going to talk about some of the logistics and moves to make early on, and then hopefully by the end of the video, you'll see this strategy's true lethality when using it over the board. There are several tenets to executing this strategy properly. The first is piece preservation and avoiding offensive action. To increase the likelihood of success, we're going to allow the Allies to come forward a little bit and essentially abandon the beach defenses. In this way, we'll essentially trade space for time in order that we can get organized in the middle of the board. The second pillar of this strategy is to avoid strafe rolls. We really want to avoid giving the Allies any opportunity to destroy our units via strafe. So wherever there might be one or more Allied fighters, this is a zone that we really do not want to enter or otherwise instigate a strafe. The third tenet of this strategy is battle group creation. And what I consider a proper battle group is an 8-piece German army in one zone that is composed of at least 2 anti-aircraft guns. The other 6 pieces can be pretty much anything the German player desires, although I recommend having at least 2 infantry to act as soaks if you engage in combat. Of course, the purpose of having at least a pair of AA guns is to tax any fighters that try to fly over the territory that you're occupying. The fourth point in managing this strategy is being very aware of what's going on with your reinforcement card, particularly with regards to AA guns. And the reason this is important is because you want a steady stream of a pair of anti-aircraft guns entering your reinforcement zones. And this is for the same aforementioned reason that you want to be able to tax any fighters that happen to fly over on any given Allied turn. So these are the 4 points to keep in mind while maneuvering into the plow position as the German player. So what I'm going to do now is do a mock-up turn 2 for the German player so that you can kind of see some of these points in action. So let's say the turn 2 order card process has started, and the point of most concern for us as the German player when using this strategy is what the Allies decide to do with their fighters. For this example, let's assume that the Allies put 4 fighters over St. Lo and 4 fighters over Caen. Why the Allied player might want to do this will be discussed on the Allied strategic video. The main purpose of this is to demonstrate what a German player might want to do towards building the plow on turn 2 when there is little or no fighter activity in this area of the board. We'll say that the German AA gun missed. We'll say the Allied bombers blast this AA gun, make some basic moves as the Allies. We'll say the British go ahead and attack the area east of Caen, move into Caen itself, engage in another round of combat, and otherwise end their turn in this board state. Okay, so if we look something like this going into the Germany side of turn 2, my recommendation is to first look carefully at the reinforcement card. And again, we want to pay close attention to the availability of AA guns on this next turn. The most common dice roll for reinforcements on either side is going to be a 6, 7, or 8. So we can see that even at a roll of 5 on the Rouen side, we'll get 2 AA guns. And we're going to get at least 1 AA gun on the Rhine side, possibly a second one. Okay, let's go back to the map. This is a very forgiving strategy, so there's multiple ways we could do this. But in keeping with the 4 tenets stated earlier, I'm going to go ahead and pull this infantry back and push this army group up. This will make an 8-piece battle group to the east of St. Lo, and I know that I have at least 2 AA guns coming in here. That's going to be the priority territory for which AA guns will go on this reinforcement phase. This army is locked in combat, so we're going to write them off for the time being, and we're going to move these forces down to the Rouen South zone. We're going to leave this armor in St. Lo, and then we're going to disperse these 2 infantry, 1 in each space, and that's just to water down the effect of a fighter flying over a territory with 2 infantry in it. The last group that's going to move is going to be the Rhine's right sector. We want to push further right, and the main reason we want to do this is to clear the reinforcement zone. We want to open up as much space as possible so that if we get a hot roll, everyone can come on safely. And getting off the reinforcement zones is going to help to that end. We'll now engage in a single round of combat. We'll say that the Omaha Beach defenses have been cleared by the Allies, and that both sides lose an additional 2 pieces in the battle east of Caen. It's being a little bit generous to the Allies, but that's okay. And when we get to the reinforcement phase, we're going to say that the Germans roll 6 for both sides, just slightly under par. But we're going to decide where to place these 6 on the Rouen side and where to place these 6 on the Rhine side. So in this case, I would absolutely put the Rouen side AA guns in Chartres left and the Rhine's AA gun on the Rhine's right reinforcement zone. Everything else is just infantry, so in this case I'll just put the infantries in the zones for which they were assigned. So we look like this going into round 3, and already you can kind of see this plow building up. And the reinforcement card looks pretty good going into round 3. As you can see, the Rhine side in particular has 3 guns coming in as the first 3 pieces, and the Rouen side has at least 1 and probably 2 as well, so we're going to be flush with AA guns come next turn. So this is a good demonstration of building the plow for turn 2 onwards. We have a nice corridor of AA guns being built up down here in the relevant areas. The Allies are still stuck out here on the beaches for the most part, and we're going to have at least 1 and probably 2 more turns of unfettered movement for the German player. But let's do one more example. Let's say the Allied player is very aware of this plow strategy and does everything he can to make it difficult. What would we do in that situation? Okay, I've partially reset the board. I've left the Allied ground movements the same, but let's go ahead and say that their fighter plan looks a little bit different. Let's say they place 2 fighters over St. Lo, not 4, and only 1 fighter over Caen. And in this case, let's say that the other 5 fighters completely cut off the area where the plow wants to move on the first turn. What do we do as the German player in this position? Again, keeping the 4 tenets of the plow in mind, we're not going to change the move off to the east here. We're not going to be moving this battle group at all because any movement would net a strafe roll, and we do not want that. With one slight exception, this piece here is probably best taking its chances moving to Calmont. And that leaves the pieces down here in the southwest corner. So given that the Chartres sectors are blocked up by pieces or allied fighters, we need to move this zone. So obviously we're going to move over to this one here. So we'll move this whole battle group over here, and then also bring these 2 infantry down south. These units have no AA gun to protect them, but they are off the reinforcement zones, and not being all piled up in one zone together means there's at least some dispersal. And then finally, assuming identical reinforcement rolls, we'll put all 6 pieces from Reims into the Reims right reinforcement zone. And from the Rouen zone, we'll place 1 infantry in Chartres and the other 5 in Rouen south. And so this is how we'll look going into turn 3. And the reason I wanted to demonstrate this second example is to highlight how flexible this strategy is for the German player. So long as we're following the tenets of the plow, namely by avoiding combat and avoiding these strafe rolls, because there's so much time between now and the end of the game, there will be ample opportunity to move into zones adjacent to these cities, or in the case of Saint-Lô, even into the city. A quick side note, as the German player, I actually wouldn't enter Caen. This is too close to Allied reinforcement zones, so just setting up battle groups in the territories around it is going to be fine. And in terms of the mid-game strategy, that's pretty much it. The only time we're actually going to be worried about the Allied player is if he secures Saint-Lô, Caen, and clears Cherbourg. And in this case, the Germans must attack. And this is the crux of the plow strategy. This is the end result, the moment we've been waiting for and building on for the entire game. So I'm now going to cut to what I consider to be the worst case scenario. Let's assume it's the end of Allied turn 9 and all 3 cities are under Allied control. But not only that, we're going to assume that Saint-Lô and Caen are occupied by 8 Allied ground units and each covered by 4 fighters. There, that's better. Let's say we have a situation that looks something like this on turn 9. Now this is a little generous to the Allies, and I'll have to articulate why that is in the Allied strategic video. Again, I consider this the worst case scenario for the German player. And now I'm going to demonstrate why this is still very much in favor of the Germans actually taking the win in this game. The critical action to take as the German player on this turn is to launch 2 8-piece attacks, one at Saint-Lô and one at Caen. And since the statistics are exactly the same for each city, we're going to zoom in and look at Caen. Okay, so it's turn 9 and it's the German movement phase. And the goal is for the Germans to have at least 1 piece in either Saint-Lô or Caen by the end of this phase. And so long as we have at least 1 German piece in the city at the end of this phase, the game is over and there's no need to play round 10. The Germans can't use any of these pieces in the contested zones, but we do have 8 pieces here in Villers-Bocage. So we're going to push all 8 into Caen. And the only thing we care about as the German player is how many strafe rolls are successful and how well the British units in Caen actually defend. Whatever hits the German player gets are irrelevant. And so the first hurdle this German force has to pass through are these 4 fighters. Each German piece will individually have 4 dice thrown at it, and the reality is there's a 51.8% chance that each piece is destroyed. The most likely outcome, therefore, is that the Germans will lose 4 pieces before even getting to the ground units in Caen. Just a side note here, if you're using low luck or adding up pips and dividing by 6, don't make the mistake and fool yourself into thinking that there's a 66% chance that each piece gets destroyed. Because the reality is, each German piece's survival is closer to a coin flip. Once the German player clears the fighter screen, they'll roll 4 dice, but this has no effect on the game. And then the final roll, or the potential final roll, will be rolled by the British. I'll point out that there's just shy of a 26% chance that the British actually destroy all 4 pieces. In other words, there's basically a 74% chance that at least 1 German piece survives. And since at the top of round 10, there will be a German piece in Caen, and thus preventing the Allies from holding a secured victory city for 1 whole turn, the game will be over and it will be a German win. there will be no need to play round 10. The same exact statistics will exist in St. Lo, and even in this, what I consider to be best case scenario for the Allied player, there is only a roughly 6 to 12% chance that the Allies are able to prevent at least one German piece surviving in these two battles, to say nothing about what's going on northwest in Cherbourg. I haven't said much about this victory city, so I'll say a few things about it right now. Cherbourg can and should be an afterthought for the German player. And essentially following the same tenets of the plow strategy, you can absolutely get a good bang for your buck up here. In the fewest amount of words, it's going to be the Americans that have to send units up here to clear it. So it's on them to make sure that they send enough pieces to do so. The only thing I might highlight for the German player to look out for is an opportunity to release armor up this route path and reinforce Cherbourg. Adding even 1 or 2 units up here can really put the screws on the Allies, but it's nothing necessary. Okay, the time has come to wrap up this video. This was the German strategic video for Axis and Allies D-Day. I showcased what I believe to be the most winning strategy for the German player, and I call it the plow. We went over the 4 tenets to this strategy, and I did my best to demonstrate how to maneuver your forces into a position to deliver a lethal late-game attack that almost always stands an excellent chance of bringing the game to a conclusion in Germany's favor. So let me know what you think of the plow strategy. The next video will be the Allied strategic video. Hope to see you there. All the best from the good captain, and bye-bye.